hopeful song we barely understood. And we are not afraid, although we know there's much to fear. We were moving mountains long before we knew we could. There can be miracles when you believe. When you believe. Though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. Who knows what miracles you can achieve when you believe. Somehow you will. You will when you believe.
Beautiful, beautiful song, When You Believe, from Kippah Live out of Israel. They are on YouTube, a beautiful a cappella singing group. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. It's great to be with you. We're keeping the mood a little bit down. We're about to enter Tisha B'Av, the fast of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, when we're going to commemorate so many calamities in Jewish history, principally the destruction of both the first and second temple happened on this date, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av. Let us light up the darkness. Today, we're going to cover a few points from the daf that we are on, and then I'm going to share with you the dramatic, emotional story that is in the Talmud about the final days, what actually led to the destruction of the second temple and the downfall of Jerusalem and the exile that we are still in today. Who is with us? Let us see who's in the house. Sandy McMurray says, Michigan in the house. James Roth says, shalom from Indianapolis. Yehudit Sobel says, shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Tesla Roos, can a married Jewish woman cover her hair if her husband is not Jewish? I'm not sure. I would think, why not? But that's a question for another day. Right now, we're just getting who's in the house, and then we're going to get into today's study. Rochelle Rosen says, Modesto is in the house. Kim Hyde, Huntsville, Alabama. Bill Eldridge says hello from Berkeley. Augusto Martin says aquí en Miramar. Saludos. Jonalyn Micheli Kane says shalom from Baton Rouge. Ladybug says shalom, shalom. Stephen Geger is with us from Dover, New Hampshire. Mita Sol Pacheco is with us from Washington. Ginny Fahey, Acosella, happy to be here. Rochelle Rosen, is tomorrow Hag or just a fast day? It is not a Hag. Typically, we won't work if we can avoid working, but it's not a festival. It does not have the restrictions of Shabbos or Yom Tov, Shabbos or a festival. But we fast because of these terrible calamities that befell us on this day in history. Ross Cowan says, how am I in this group and how do I leave? Why don't you just shut the video? John Shore says, Sedona, have a meaningful Tisha B'Av. Christo Cheney says, hope you have a meaningful fast tonight and tomorrow. Best regards from Lubbock, Texas. Irdiancia, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Tanjung says, salam, beautiful, welcome. It's great that you're with us. Tesla Roos enjoyed that song. Christopher Engelhart, is that Rabbi Schnitzel on the ones and twos? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. Brandon Christian Sullivan says, shalom from Knoxville, Tennessee. Susan Levin says, I appreciate you so much. Thank you. Laura Kuhn is with us from the Sooner State of Norman, Oklahoma. Bryna Bloomfeld is fasting already because it's nighttime in Cambridge, Massachusetts. May you all be blessed. Jacqueline Bros says shalom from Minneapolis, Minnesota. We will stay on until my synagogue Zoom. There's a lot of Zoom meetings. This is one nice thing about Tisha B'Av. We can say there's a nice thing about it. It's a tradition to learn on the night of Tisha B'Av. This is one holiday where there's no problem, even if you're, religious and observant, and you don't use electronics on Shabbos or Yom Tov. You can use it on Tisha B'Av, and so a lot of people are going to be connecting to learning sessions tonight and tomorrow via Zoom. It's a great opportunity. Jack Paris says hello from Vancouver. Christopher Engelhardt is with us from Boston. Jerry Burzlov Ashley says shalom from Quincy, Canada. Paul Garcia, shalom from San Antonio, Texas. Alan Hallis is with us from Glasgow. Hey all. Arnold Alban is with us from Northridge, California. Gisette Elias says shalom. Lynn Verna is with us from Jacksonville. Jennifer Stidham is with us from Southern California. Tesla Roos is in Palm Springs. Leah Meza is with us in Miami, Florida. Gwen Strong is with us in Southwest Michigan. Isa Kabir says, how do you choose your name? That's a story for another day, but you can find it at accidentaltalmudist.org. Martin Wade says, shalom and love to hear you. And Alan is also fasting in Scotland. Vaughn Billow is with us from Fremont, Ohio. Gwen Strong from Southwest Michigan. Neil from Virginia. And Marjorie from Georgia. All right, lots to cover today. So let's get right into it. So our daf is page 145. So Kuf Mem Hey in Tractate Shabbos. We're in chapter 22. We're going to finish our discussion of Mishnah 1 and cover some of the material in Mishnah number 2. I'm going to move through it fast because I want to get to the story of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza since tonight is Tisha B'Av. All right, we've been discussing juice and oil that seeps out of fruit, particularly olives and grapes on Shabbos, as well as lemons and oranges and melons and pomegranates we've talked about. Now, if it seeps out from olives and grapes, that's a special case, and for sure, even if it seeps out and we didn't do anything to the olives or grapes, that liquid that comes out of them on Shabbos is prohibited for drinking, right? You actually can squeeze some of the juice out of grapes if it goes right into a solid food. Likewise, you could squeeze a lemon into, let's say onto your salmon or into your guacamole, as we have learned. But the difference between the lemon and the olives or the grapes is that if you unwittingly squeeze, like you forgot it was Shabbos, and you squeeze the juice purposely out of the grapes or olives, you did it unwittingly, so it wouldn't be an intentional sin, but you would become liable to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. Whereas if you squeeze the juice out of a lemon because you didn't know it was Shabbos, it's prohibited either way. But squeezing the juice out of a lemon is prohibited by rabbinic decree. It's not a Torah violation. So it's prohibited either way, but you would not become liable to bring a sin offering when the temple stands if you squeeze it out of some other fruit. That's the difference between other fruits and the grapes or olives. Excuse me. Why are grapes and olives special? Because they have a special role to play in lots of laws in the Torah. They're the special fruits of the Holy Land. We looked at the 7 liquids that render a dry food susceptible to ritual impurity, and we recall that only works if the liquid was drawn out of the fruit or out of the container by the volition of the owner, and that it somehow came into contact with the dry food, again on purpose by the owner. And so in today's daf, we're giving the example of what if somebody who is tameh, right? So he himself has contracted ritual impurity. He touched a corpse, he touched a creeping thing, he had an emission himself. For whatever reason, he is tameh. Is he going to render olives that he touches? Is he going to make them tameh? Is he going to transmit his ritual impurity to those olives? And it actually depends on the situation. So if he's cutting olives in order to serve the olives to his guest, now when he cuts the olives, a little bit of liquid is going to seep out of the olives. That's not squeezing. It's just a little bit of liquid that's going to seep out. But it's going to seep out. It's liquid from olives. The food that he's preparing is done. He's serving olives. So that liquid that seeps out is going to be enough to render the olives, which is before they're cut, essentially a dry food. Even though it's moist, it's a dry food. It hasn't come into contact with any liquid, any of the 7 liquids that would render it susceptible. But one of those 7 liquids is oil. And when he cuts it, a little bit of oil seeps out. He's the one that's cutting it. And so now he's going to make those olives tameh. And so a person who cannot eat tameh foods, that's not everybody, but if you're, for example, going to go to the temple, or you are a priest, or you're a person who needs to eat food that is only in a state of tahara, in a state of ritual purity, so then you would not be able to eat those olives because the guy who was tameh and cut the olives transmitted his tuma, his ritual impurity, to the olives, and they were rendered susceptible. It was possible because when he cut it, that liquid that seeped out of the olives is enough to render the olives susceptible to impurity. Interesting thing, however, is if he's cutting the olives because he's on his farm and he just wants to see if the olives are ready, are they ripe yet? He's just checking them for their ripeness. Or he's cutting them in order to salt them. In both of these cases, it is not a finished food yet, right? It's just part of the process, the farmer checking his olives, or the olive oil maker checking his olives, or the one who's going to salt the olives is in the midst of a process that's going to lead to a food at the end of that process, those salted olives, but we're not there yet. So now the liquid that comes out is completely incidental and it is not desired by the person. Right? When you cut olives, you want them to be moist, juicy olives that you can serve to your guests. But when you're just checking and you're not, it's not because you want to see it's not because you want to serve them. It's not because they're ready to be served. It's not for that final product. So now it's like it's not his volition that the liquid comes out. And so he does not transmit his tuma to those olives. That's on today's page. Okay, we also learn that if you have a fish that has been, I guess it's some kind of a salted fish, it's got brine, right? Brine is basically salt water. If you wanted to now remove the salt water from the fish on Shabbos, and likewise, we're going to talk about pickled vegetables and boiled vegetables. So these 3 cases are different than the fruit. The fruit naturally has liquid in it, naturally has juice or oil in it. In terms of pickled vegetables or boiled vegetables, or this fish that was preserved in brine, now it's like it already went through some kind of a process that humans did. We added liquid into it. So now if we draw liquid out of those foods, are we going to be violating a Torah or rabbinic prohibition if we squeeze those liquids out? And what we're going to learn is that it's prohibited to squeeze the fish to get the brine out of it, I guess because it doesn't improve it when you take brine out of it. But with pickled vegetables and boiled vegetables, if for some reason you wanted to squeeze the liquid out of them in order to make the vegetables themselves better, like they had too much liquid in them and you want to get the liquid out so that you can serve the pickled vegetables or the boiled vegetables, that is permitted on Shabbos. It's just the final step. It's almost akin to seasoning. It's just that final bit to get it ready for the table. Hold on a second. We may squeeze pickled or boiled vegetables to improve them. Right. But if we want the liquid, now we can squeeze the liquid out of the pickled vegetables or the boiled vegetables because we want to improve the pickled vegetables or the boiled vegetables. But if for some reason I want the pickle juice or I want the boiled potato juice, right? It's the liquid that I want now. So that's going to be prohibited. We're going to be exempt from bringing the sin offering. It's not a Torah violation, but the rabbis decreed that this is too similar to extracting juice. And so that's going to be prohibited. Although we can if we want that liquid, we can draw it out and just put it on food. That's going to be permitted in the same way that squeezing a lemon to get some juice for the salmon or the guacamole, that's permitted. So we can take out pickled juice or boiled vegetable juice to put on some other food. But if we wanted just the juice and we were going to squeeze it out and deposit it in an empty vessel, that would be prohibited. We'd be exempt from bringing the sin offering. We will not have violated a Torah we would not have violated a Torah prohibition, but we would have violated a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, and now it's just brought down one more time to finish this section that, as I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of when we squeeze olives and grapes, if we do that on Shabbos unwittingly, we have violated a Torah prohibition. The other fruits, we're only violating a rabbinic prohibition. That is a teaching of Rav Chia bar Ashi in the name of Rav. And the School of Menashe teaches the same principle, that squeezing grapes and olives is the only one that's a Torah violation. Other fruits are a rabbinic decree. Having learned this teaching from the School of Menashe, we're now going to learn a completely unrelated teaching of the School of Menashe. The School of Menashe teaches that although we never accept in a court of law, so in a Sanhedrin, when a Beis Din meets, when we're going to have a Jewish court, we would never accept, the testimony of a single witness. It always takes two witnesses to bring about a conviction, or to accept testimony in court that's going to bring about an action, either convicting someone of a crime or finding somebody liable to pay damages, etc. We would always require two witnesses, but there is a case where we will accept one witness. We would never accept hearsay testimony. In other words, if somebody comes to the court and says to us, I heard someone say that something happened, right? That's second-hand news. Courts don't accept that. We want evidence, right? If somebody saw something, then they can come into court and tell us that. But they can't come into court and say that somebody else said that something happened. That's hearsay testimony. It's never accepted. We also don't accept testimony from minors and from certain relatives and certain things that are said in passing. These are all rules of evidence that are very strict rules of evidence. And all these rules are going to be put aside for a very important case. And this is the case of a woman whose husband went away. He went away, let's say, to war. He was a soldier and he went to fight a war. Or he was a businessman and he went to travel in another country. And he disappeared. And he never came back. Now, this woman is probably a widow, right? But they didn't have a statute of limitations that after a certain number of years, we can just assume the husband died and now she's free to remarry. She's going to be stuck and unable. She's not going to be considered officially a widow who's free to marry someone else until we have some kind of evidence that the husband died. But in this case, we don't need two witnesses to come forward and say they saw the husband die. One witness is enough. And not only that, but one witness who comes in and says, I heard so-and-so say that man died. And it's going to, we're still going to examine the story to see if it makes sense. It's logical. It has that ring of truth. But if it does, it's going to be enough to free this poor woman who's been waiting for the missing husband. Finally, she's free and she can remarry and start her life again. So that's a teaching that we get from the School of Menashe. And we only hear it here. It has nothing to do with everything else we're talking about. But the Talmud does this very often. Having brought one teaching from the School of Menashe, it lists another teaching from that same source. And there it is. Now we proceed to Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 22 of Tractate Shabbos. And we learn that a food which was boiled before Shabbos, it is permitted to soak it in hot water on Shabbos. There's going to be an exception for that for certain kinds of salted fish, where that final soaking is like the last step needed for its cooking, essentially, for its preparation to be finished. So it's not going to apply to that. But in the case of chicken, If for some reason somebody boils the chicken on Friday and then needs to soak that chicken in hot water on Shabbos, that is going to be permitted. And the Gemara asks, why would we do that? Why would anybody do that? It's like it's already boiled. Why would you soak it more in hot water? Wouldn't that somehow actually mess it up and make it worse? Wouldn't that be a destructive act? The fact that it's a destructive act is actually why it's permitted. But why would anybody do that? So Rav Safra, so usually when we have a sage referred to as Rav somebody, this is one of the Babylonian sages. And when we have a rabbi who's referred to as Rabbi so-and-so, usually this is one of the sages in Israel, in the land of Israel, or what's called the West. The East is in Babylonia, the West is in Israel. Rav Safra said that this is how Rabbi Abba ate his chicken. He had medical reasons to do so, but he boiled it till the meat was falling off the bone on Friday, and then they would soak it more in hot water on Shabbos. And Rav Safra says that if Rabbi Abba, had not also served 3-year-old wine, presumably that means fine quality, good wine, that if Rabbi Abba had not also served this 3-year-old wine, then the dinner that Rabbi Abba served was so gross that Rav Safra would have had to vomit. That's what he says. It was so awful, this dish, that I would have had to vomit. Now, I don't know if it's so much that it's Rabbi Abba who eats such disgusting things, or perhaps it's just that the people in the West have different taste than we have here in the East, Rav Safra is saying. And so then we hear a little bit more in the ensuing discussion about differences in taste between the people in the East, in Bavel, in Babylonia, the Jewish community in Babylonia, and the Jewish community in Israel. Recall that now this is all post-Second Temple destruction, and so the West in Israel is a Jewish community that's ever shrinking because of the persecution of Rome, and they're much more free to learn and to teach and to be themselves in Babylonia. So even though you would think that there's somehow something superior about the Jewish community in Israel, and there was, in the sense they were still on the Holy Land, but they were not free to really thrive there. And so the Jewish community in Babylonia is really thriving, growing, has more traditions. And of course, it's ultimately the Babylonian Talmud that it was larger and gets completed. And the Palestinian Talmud, the Talmud in the land of Israel, that ends up incomplete because of that Roman persecution over there. At any rate, more of these differences are mentioned, including, let's see, that Rabbi Yochanan says, so Rabbi Yochanan, this is actually, who lived much earlier, but he had already mentioned that the kutach, which is a dish, a dip that they use in Babylonia, Rabbi Yochanan found it disgusting, right? So things that the Babylonian Jews find disgusting in the Israeli Jews, that likewise, there are things that the Israeli Jews find disgusting that the Babylonian Jews like to eat. A number of other differences are discussed, including this observation that the festivals in Babylonia, the Jewish festivals in Babylonia, by the time of the Gemara, right, by the time of the Talmud, in other words, between the year 200 of the Common Era and the year 500 of the Common Era, in that period, it was already observed that the Jewish festivals celebrated in Bavel, in Babylonia, were more joyous than the Jewish festivals celebrated in the land of Israel, in the Holy Land itself. So the question is, why? Why are the festivals more joyous in Babylonia? Here we go. So Rabbi Yochanan said, for what reason are the festivals in Babylonia more joyous than those in Eretz Yisroel? Because they were not included in that curse with which Eretz Yisroel was cursed, as it is written, meaning that it was cursed leading to the fall of the Second Temple, right? And the exile that we're still in 2,000 years later. The land was cursed on account of what? The sins of the Jews, right? We blame ourselves. It was Nebuchadnezzar, and actually the Babylonians, who destroyed the first temple. It was the Romans who destroyed the second temple, as we will see. But we blame ourselves. It was for our own sins, and that is why a curse came down on the land and the people in it. And that curse doesn't apply in Babylonia. So says Rabbi Yochanan, as it is written, and I will cause all her happiness to cease, her festival, her new moon, and her Shabbos, and all her festivals. That's from the book of Hosea, chapter 2:13. And it is also written, my soul hates your new moons and your festivals. They are a burden to me. I am weary to bear them. That's the prophet Isaiah speaking in God's voice, right? God says that my soul hates your new moons and festivals. They're a burden to me. And what is the meaning of the phrase, they are a burden to me? Rabbi Elazar said that the Holy One, blessed be he, said, is it not enough for the Jewish people that they sin before me, that they also must burden me to know which harsh decree I will bring upon them? Rabbi Yitzchak said, because of this curse, there is not a single festival on which troops did not come to Tzipori, right? So even after Jerusalem was destroyed, there was a Jewish community, but they were not centered around Jerusalem anymore. Now they were in northern Israel. Tzipori was one of those important centers. And yet anytime that they would try to celebrate a Jewish holiday in the city of Tzipori, says Rabbi Elazar, says Rabbi Yitzchak, there is not a single festival on which troops did not come to Tzipori to conduct searches or to collect taxes. And Rabbi Hanina said, there is not a single festival on which an Egmon and a Kamton and a branch bearer, in other words, Roman officials, did not come to Tiberias to collect taxes, thereby disrupting the festive celebrations. So even after the fall of the temple, the fall of Jerusalem, and all the destruction that ensued, and people were just clinging to the land and having to, trying to renew and restore and have some kind of a Jewish existence there, they kept suffering that Roman persecution. And they're saying, we did it to ourselves. And that's why this suffering goes on and on and on. We lost the ability and the right to live in this land, and God keeps punishing us for it. Okay. And now that we're talking about the destruction, and tonight, Tisha B'Av coming in, so we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem right as it's, how many times have we been talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in the last 50 or 100 pages? Not that often. So of course there's a little synchronicity here. This is one of those little accidents where God gives us a peek and says, if you're paying attention, I'm speaking to you all the time in the language of events, and I've arranged for you that, Sal, you're teaching AT Daily, and you're teaching these people about the Talmud, and I'm going to put a mention in the Talmud about the destruction of the temple on the day that worldwide Jews are remembering the destruction of the temple. So, let us read. This is from Masechet Gittin. So this is a tractate of the Talmud that is actually about divorce. It's about divorce. And it makes sense at the end of the day, why are we talking about divorce? Because in a sense, it was a divorce. It's not spiritually related, but it's not. In fact, the marriage between God and the Jewish people never ended in divorce. We're still married. And eventually we will be reunited, right? We'll share that love again that we had at the outset prior to all our sins that led us into the exile that we're in. And now we have a state of Israel, which is incredible. Our ancestors have been longing for such a state for 2,000 years. So that is definitely considered the dawn of the redemption. But since the third temple has not been restored and the Messiah has not arrived, we're not there yet, right? So we're not there yet. That's why we're still considered to be in the exile. But now, here in Tractate Gittin, the law that's being discussed here, the Mishnah, has to do with what happens when, wartime opportunists buy and sell land. What are the rights and responsibilities in such a land deal? And that was going on in the years and the time leading up to the destruction. It was already clear that a lot of bad stuff was going on. The people were, sinning a lot, and some wanted to rise up and rebel against Rome, and it was just a bad time. And there were a lot of speculators making money on the chaos of those days, buying properties or just seizing properties and trying to turn them over and make some money. And it's in the context of that discussion that we learn how the fall of Jerusalem actually happened, as our sages lay it out in the Talmud. And as we'll see, our sages, you probably heard this teaching before, that the second temple was destroyed due to baseless hatred among Jews. Baseless hatred among Jews. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of the modern state of Israel, said, what is baseless hatred? Any hatred among Jews. When we factionalize, right? When we split into camps, we disagree all the time. I mean, we see that the whole Talmud is about passionate disagreements. Of course we disagree. But when we come to hate people that disagree with us, now we're setting ourselves up for tragedy. And here's the story that teaches that. Jerusalem was destroyed. This is the story starts on page 55b of Tractate Gittin. Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. So these are two men. One is named Kamtza, the other is named Bar Kamtza. You would think it sounds like one is the father and one is the son, but that's actually not stated anywhere. So it's unclear if that's true. It may just be a coincidence. It may also be that it was a father and son. Now, the issue is not exactly between them, as we'll see. There was a certain man whose friend was named Kamtza and whose enemy was Bar Kamtza. Right? So Kamtza and Bar Kamtza have relationships with a third party. Right? There's this other man, and he doesn't even have a name in this story. So the nameless one is good friends with Kamtza and enemies with Bar Kamtza. So the nameless man, made a large feast. And he said to his servant, go invite my friend Kamtza. But the servant made a mistake, and he went out and he brought back Bar Kamtza. The man who was hosting the feast came and found his enemy, Bar Kamtza, sitting at the feast. The host said to Bar Kamtza, that man, meaning you, you are my enemy. Right? So when you say that man is my enemy, this is often a Talmudic euphemism. When you're going to say something really strong, instead of saying you would say that man. Let's just translate it so we understand. You are my enemy. Arise, what do you want here? You are my enemy. What do you want here? Arise and leave. That's what the host of the party says to Bar Kamtza. Bar Kamtza answered, since I have already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just don't embarrass me by sending me out. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamtza said to him, I will give you enough money to pay for half of this entire feast. Just don't send me away and humiliate me in front of all these people. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamtza then said to him, I will pay for the entire feast, just so that I don't get humiliated in front of this community. And the host said to him, no, you must leave, you're my enemy. And finally, the host took Kamtza by the arm, stood him up, and took him out. You see what it meant to Bar Kamtza not to be humiliated, and the host not only wouldn't let him stay, but physically threw him out of the party. After being cast out from the feast, Bar Kamtza said to himself, the sages were sitting there at that feast, right? So this was like the VIPs of Jerusalem, the VIPs, including the sages. The sages were sitting there, and they did not protest the actions of the host although they saw how he humiliated me. So you can imagine it turned into a screaming argument in front of everybody. This guy begging not to be embarrassed and the host insisting on embarrassing him. Now, we don't know what it is that Bar Kamtza might have done in the past to so anger the host that the host would not stand to have him in his house. We don't know. But here's where we are now. The sages were sitting there and they did not protest. Learn from it that they were content, that they approved of what he did. I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He went and said to the emperor, right? So think about what's going on here. Clearly, these are all Jews, right? So this guy Bar Kamtza is so upset, feels so victimized by being pushed out of that party. I mean, remember, when the thing first started, he could have just got up and quietly left. But it turned into this big argument, it turned into this big thing. He was finally thrown out. And then he said, since the sages were there, they must have, and didn't say anything, they must have approved. And therefore, I'm going to go and inform and create a calamity for the whole nation. That's what happened. So he says, I will go to the emperor. And he did. He went to the emperor of Rome. And he said to the emperor of Rome, now Bar Kamtza was obviously a pretty significant person if he can get an audience with the emperor of Rome. The Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says this? Bar Kamtza said to him, go and test them. Send them an offering to be brought in their temple in honor of the Roman government and see whether they will sacrifice it. The emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. So like the most choice offering that could be made. While Bar Kamtza was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish in the calf's upper lip. And some say he made the blemish on its eyelids, a place where, according to us, according to the law, this is a blemish and therefore the animal can't be offered on the altar. But according to the Romans, they also brought sacrifices in their idolatrous temples. And what counts as a blemish for us doesn't count as a blemish for them. So Bar Kamtza was very crafty and arranged a situation where a calf that would appear perfectly good to the Romans would be blemished in our eyes, and therefore we wouldn't offer it on the temple. And this would be evidence that the Jews are rebellious within the Roman Empire, that they want to throw off the yoke of Roman authority. And therefore, when Bar Kamtza brought the animal to the temple, the priests would not sacrifice it on the altar since it was blemished. But they also could not explain this satisfactorily to the Gentile authorities who were present, because an offering had been sent directly by the Roman emperor. And they don't consider that this animal is blemished. The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal anyway, as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the Roman authority. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. We can't just bend the rules. We can't bend the halakha because we have a difficult situation. We have a law. It's an ancient law. We can't bring animals with this blemish. The sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent Bar Kamtza from reporting to the emperor. The sages thought to kill him so that he would not go and speak against them. But Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed. And as a result, they did nothing. Now, obviously, the reason to kill him would not be because he made a blemish on an animal. The reason to kill him is because he was trying to undermine, the Jewish people and create a problem in Rome. But for whatever reason, I think really what's happening here is they were debating back and forth, and they couldn't bring themselves to kill this man, even though he was creating this sedition. And in the end, they didn't do anything. They did nothing. Bar Kamtza's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently, the war between the Jews and the Romans began. Rabbi Yochanan says, the excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolas destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land. Now, why don't we continue the story just to see how this plays out? The Roman authorities then sent Nero Caesar against the Jews. When he came to Jerusalem, he wished to test his fate. He wanted to see, is it really going to happen that Jerusalem is going to fall, this city that has stood for 1,200 years? And so he shot an arrow in the opposite direction of Jerusalem, and somehow the arrow landed in Jerusalem. And then he shot an arrow, shot it to the east, and then he shot it to the west, and it landed in Jerusalem. He shot his arrow to the north, and it landed in Jerusalem. He shot it to the south, and it landed in Jerusalem. No matter where he aimed the arrow, it went toward Jerusalem. He treated this as an omen that for some reason, the time has come to destroy Jerusalem. And then he did, this is a very Talmudic convention, this Roman Caesar who's been sent to destroy Jerusalem comes across Jewish school children studying, and he says to them, what verse are you learning? Very often when people are not quite sure what to do, usually it's a sage, here it's put in the mouth of a Caesar, they ask a child, what verse are you learning in the Bible? And whatever it happens to be, it's sort of like taken as a message from heaven. So Nero asked a child, what verse are you learning? And the child said, and I will lay my vengeance upon Edom by the hand of my people Israel. Nero said, the Holy One, blessed be he, wishes to destroy his temple, and he wishes to wipe his hands with that man, i.e. me. The Romans are associated with Edom, the descendants of Esau. If I continue on this mission, I will eventually be punished for having served as God's agent to bring about the destruction. So he fled and became a convert to Judaism, and ultimately Rabbi Meir descended from him. Yeah? Okay, just go ahead without me. I'm just doing something. I'll be finished soon. Okay, so the Roman authorities, so in other words, beware, right? When God is ready to punish the Jewish people for whatever he's going to do, he's going to do it. And he's going to use a human instrument to bring that punishment. You don't want to be the instrument of God's punishment against the Jewish people. That's what Nero realized, and he was ultimately right. Well, it's a long story, and Nina's just alerted me that we're coming to the end of our time because we've got to have dinner to get ready for the fast of Tisha B'Av tonight. So just to summarize what's going to happen is that then Nero is going to be replaced by Vespasian. Vespasian is going to come. He's going to lay siege to Jerusalem. He's eventually going to breach the walls on the 17th of Tammuz. Or actually, the walls are going to be breached. Vespasian is going to be out there. It's going to be a long siege. I think it's like 3 years, that siege. Things inside Jerusalem are going to get worse and worse and worse. Now, they had so much wealth in Jerusalem that they could have lasted for 21 years. They could have outlasted, the Romans would have got bored with them, and they could have survived the siege. But among the Jews, there were zealots who wanted to fight with Rome. Right? They were guerrillas. They were rioters. Right? They were people who thought they knew better, and they said, "No, the time has come. Let's just fight a war with Rome." And anyone who was wise, like the sages, could see if we fight a war with Rome, we're going to be destroyed. But these zealots wanted their war so bad that they destroyed the stockpile of food and firewood and everything that the people in Jerusalem would have needed to survive the siege. After the zealots destroyed it, it became inevitable, and it was clearly they were going to fail. It was all going to go down, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai went to his nephew, who was one of the heads of the zealots, and said, "You got to get me out of here. You got to get the sages out of here so that Judaism is not lost when the temple falls." And this guy said, "Well, what can I do? At this point, the zealots are out of control. They won't listen to me." And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, "Find a way." And so this nephew of his, Abba Sikaria, figured out to sneak Yochanan ben Zakkai out of Jerusalem in a coffin. Rabbi Eliezer, and who else was with him? I think Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Yochanan. No, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was in the coffin. Rabbi Eliezer was one of the people carrying the coffin. And Rabbi Yehoshua was another one. And they got Yochanan ben Zakkai out of Jerusalem. And then Vespasian was outside. and he met with Vespasian, and he prophesied correctly that Vespasian would become the emperor of Rome. And so Vespasian said, well, what can I do for you? And Yochanan said, give me Yavne and its sages, meaning let me reestablish the rabbinic tradition. Let me reestablish Torah learning in another place outside of Jerusalem, so that the whole Jewish enterprise, so that Judaism itself will not die when this temple and this city are destroyed, which is clearly happening now. And that is what happened. And that's why the sages survived and the tradition moved on and continued, and why we're still here today, 2,000 years later, learning Talmud together. Okay, let me see if there's any questions or comments. Hinda Adder says, what about today? Is the curse upon Eretz Yisroel still in effect? You know, it's hard to say, but in some ways, yeah, right? I mean, in other words, the curse, a lot of the curse has been lifted over time. And we actually have some teachings about that curses ease up over time. But do the Jews live in Israel in peace? No, no, we're not there yet. When the final redemption happens, when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, then knowledge of God will fill the world just as the water fills the sea. And at that time, everyone who has a place in the world to come, will be there. I mean, it's definitely a talk for another day, what end of times, eschatology, what it's going to look like. But in that time, there will be peace throughout the world. War and bloodshed will be no more. And what's interesting is, and the Jewish king will rule in Israel, and all the other kings, all the other rulers, all the other governments of the world will consult with him, right? So it's not that the Jewish vision of the Messianic age is that the king of the Jews rules over the world, right? There's still going to be nations, but he's going to be the Messiah. The Messiah himself will be the king of the Jews, and all the other nations will consult with him, will seek his counsel, will seek his advice. And at that point, for sure, this curse will be gone. But until then, since we certainly don't live in a time of peace, we know we're not quite there yet. Kurt Abbott, sorry I misspelled the name of my grandson. Please say Mishaberach for my grandson, Ezra Yosef Ben Elena Ve'elkana. So may he have a refuah shlema. Okay, so that's what we've got. That's what we've got for today, my friends. May the fast, if you're fasting, be a meaningful one. May we see the day soon, really soon, maybe tonight, when the Messiah will come and all this factionalizing, all this enmity, all this baseless hatred among Jews and between all the peoples in the world that we see now, it'll be gone. It will be gone. And we can hasten that day. We can bring it closer by refusing to give in to baseless hatred. We can disagree with people about policy, about politics, about everything you want to disagree about. No problem. Of course we disagree. But we don't need to hate people we disagree with. That is the lesson from the destruction of the temple. May we take it to heart. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, we'll be reading the Book of Lamentations. And we'll have this show again tomorrow at its regular time toward the end of the fast. I'll probably be weak, but I'm planning to teach. Okay, my